He hit her in front of 60 Marines. The room went dead silent. No one breathed, no one moved. By the time anyone dared to blink, she was already standing tall, calm, and watching him like she knew exactly what would happen next. Within the hour, 3 generals would land. You're watching the StoryScape, where quiet moments turn into military legends. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Camp Iridian's mess hall was built for noise. Metal trays, shouted jokes, the constant hum of tired soldiers running on caffeine. The morning sun cut through dusty windows, lighting rows of uniforms in perfect formation at long steel tables. It smelled like every military morning ever. Coffee, disinfectant, and exhaustion. Then Captain Michael Valdez walked in. The sound level dropped by instinct. Every Marine knew the pattern: the clipped boots, the square jaw, the eyes that searched for something to correct. Valdez was a combat veteran with a temper that filled every room he entered. He called it discipline. Everyone else called it danger. At the far end, near the coffee urn, a woman stood alone. She was small, maybe 5'4", dark hair tight in regulation bun, her uniform precise but stripped of rank. No name tape, no insignia. To most, she looked like any junior enlisted grabbing a caffeine refill before duty. But her stillness didn't fit the place. There was no nervous shuffle, no stiffness. She stood balanced, hands clasped behind her back, like someone trained to command silence. Valdez stopped beside her. "You think you can just walk around here like you own the place, soldier?" His voice snapped across stainless steel and tile. Conversations broke off mid-word. Forks froze. She turned slightly, eyes level. "No, sir, that won't be necessary." The calmness irritated him. He wanted the stammer, the quick "yes, sir." Instead, she gave him precision, controlled, respectful, unafraid. "When a superior officer addresses you, you stand at attention. Do I need to remind you of protocol?" "Sir, I was only getting coffee before my next appointment." "Appointment?" He gave a short, derisive laugh. "With who? Your reflection?" Laughter didn't follow. Only the electric quiet that fills a room right before it explodes. He thought he was enforcing order. In truth, he was seconds from detonating his own career. He took one step closer. She didn't move. That stillness, the way she didn't retreat, didn't flinch, felt like defiance wrapped in discipline. He could feel every eye in the room watching him, waiting to see how far he would go. "Don't you dare tell me how to handle discipline," he barked, and before his own mind could stop his hand, it was already in motion. The slap cracked through the air like a gunshot. Metal trays clattered. Someone gasped. The echo bounced off concrete walls and died into absolute silence.
The woman's head turned from the impact, but her body stayed anchored. She didn't fall, didn't even step back. Slowly, she raised a hand, touched the red mark blooming across her cheek, then adjusted her uniform jacket. "Thank you for the demonstration, Captain. That will be sufficient." Her tone was surgical. No anger, no fear, only control. It cut deeper than any shout could have. Valdez froze, pulse hammering, realizing too late that the silence around him wasn't obedience, it was disbelief. 60 Marines and 2 lieutenants were staring, every one of them registering that their commanding officer had just crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. She turned and walked away, unhurried, her boots clicking in perfect rhythm across the tile. No one dared breathe until the doors hissed shut behind her. For a moment, Valdez stood frozen, hand trembling slightly. Then his pride kicked in. He straightened, adjusted his belt, tried to look like a man in control, but the whispers were already spreading. At table 7, Staff Sergeant Rodriguez set down his cup. His instincts, honed over 23 years, screamed that something was very wrong. He'd seen fear, defiance, arrogance, but not whatever that was. No soldier takes a hit like that without blinking unless they've seen worse or outrank everyone present. He leaned toward the Marine beside him. "She's not who we think she is." The younger Marine frowned. "What do you mean?" Rodriguez pushed back his chair. "I mean, I'm about to find out." He rose and left the mess hall, boots echoing down the corridor toward the communications center. The air outside was bright and clean, the kind of false calm that comes before a storm. Behind him, Captain Valdez exhaled hard and muttered, "Disrespect handled." But the truth was already racing up the chain of command. And before the next sunrise, Camp Meridian would never be the same again. Staff Sergeant Daniel Rodriguez had seen arrogance before, but not like this. The calm in that woman's eyes had cut through the chaos like a blade. It wasn't fear. It was the stillness of someone who knew exactly what was about to happen. He pushed through the morning heat toward the communications center, the rhythmic thud of his boots echoing off the concrete walls. Marines moved past him, whispering fragments. "Did you see that? She didn't even move. Captain's done for." Rumors were spreading faster than radio signals. Inside the comms room, Corporal Hayes sat behind a bank of glowing monitors, sipping stale coffee. Rodriguez closed the door behind him. "Hayes, I need a personnel lookup. Discreet." The corporal straightened. "Who are we talking about, Staff Sergeant?" Rodriguez leaned closer. "Female, dark hair, 5'4", no visible rank. Was in the mess hall 10 minutes ago. Captain Valdez put his hands on her." Hayes blinked. "Sir, he hit her?" Rodriguez nodded grimly. "Find out who she is, quickly." The corporal began typing, the screen filling with names, ranks, units. Rodriguez watched the cursor blink, the seconds dragging.
Finally, Hayes frowned. Nothing matches. Not on active duty, not in visitor logs. It's like she doesn't exist. "Try the restricted channels," Rodriguez said. "Distinguished visitor database, Pentagon level." The corporal hesitated. "Sir, that's above my clearance." "Do it anyway," Rodriguez ordered. "You'll want to know before someone else knocks on this door." When records vanish, it's never because someone forgot to file them. It's because someone wanted them gone. Hayes typed again, bypassing security layers. The monitor flashed yellow, then red. A warning box appeared. "Access restricted. Authorized personnel only." "Staff Sergeant," Hayes whispered. "This file's locked under Joint Chief's clearance. Whoever she is, she's way above us." Rodriguez felt his stomach tighten. "Run the arrival manifest for the last 48 hours. Any unlisted VIPs?" Hayes scanned the log. 1. No name, just a clearance code starting with Pent 4A. He swallowed. "That's Pentagon-level authorization. Signed yesterday." Rodriguez exhaled slowly. The captain hadn't just slapped a soldier. He'd struck someone the Pentagon personally cleared into the base. Hayes looked pale. "Sir, what do we do now?" Rodriguez stared at the terminal. "We log it, and we pray that whoever she is, she's merciful." He turned toward the door just as Lieutenant Morrison entered, looking rattled. "Rodriguez, Colonel Patterson wants to see you, now. He's got a call from HQ about what happened in the mess hall." Rodriguez froze. "Already?" Morrison nodded. "Already. The colonel says HQ knew before he did. That sentence hit like a cold slap. If Washington already knew, it meant the woman's identity wasn't just classified, it was sacred. Rodriguez followed the lieutenant out of the room, pulse quickening. Through the narrow windows, he could see movement across the base, officers on radios, MPs being assembled. Something was unfolding faster than anyone could control. Back in the mess hall, Captain Valdez was drafting his report, his pride translating into words: disrespect, corrective action, good order maintained. He didn't notice the cameras blinking red above him, security footage already uploading to restricted servers beyond his clearance. By the time he signed the last line, 2 unmarked helicopters were already refueling at the airstrip. And before the hour was over, the sound of rotors would drown out every excuse he thought would save him. Colonel Richard Patterson had commanded Camp Meridian for 5 years. In all that time, no phone call had ever begun with the words, "This is the Pentagon." The message came through secure line less than an hour after the slap. He'd barely finished reading the incident brief when his aide, Captain Williams, rushed in, pale and sweating. "Sir, the Pentagon Operations Center is on hold. They're asking for you directly." Patterson stared at him. "Asking for me or ordering me?" "Sir, the second one." He picked up the receiver. "This is Colonel Patterson, Camp Meridian." A woman's voice answered, calm, clipped, and carrying that tone that could make colonels feel like cadets. "Colonel, we're aware of an incident involving one of your company commanders and a visiting officer. We've reviewed the footage. You are to secure the scene and detain Captain Michael Valdez immediately." Patterson blinked. "Ma'am, may I ask who the visiting officer was?" A short pause. Then, "You may not, but I'll say this. She outranks you by several stars." The line went dead. Patterson lowered the handset and stared at it like it had burned him. He turned to Williams. "Get Staff Sergeant Rodriguez here. He's the one who witnessed the entire thing." Minutes later, Rodriguez stood in front of the colonel's desk, boots still dusty from the airstrip. "Sir, the Pentagon already knows. Whoever she is, she's not ordinary personnel." Patterson nodded. "They said she outranks me. That narrows it down to about 24 people on the planet. The Pentagon doesn't make phone calls for mess hall scuffles. It moves when something threatens the chain of command itself." Across the base, military police converged on Captain Valdez's quarters. He opened the door, still smug, assuming he was about to receive an inquiry, not an arrest order. "What's this about?" he barked. "Captain Valdez, you are to report to the commanding officer immediately." Valdez straightened his collar. "Good. Maybe someone finally recognizes leadership when they see it." By the time he reached Patterson's office, the colonel's expression made it clear this wasn't leadership, it was overreach. "Captain," Patterson said flatly, "who was the soldier you struck this morning?" "A private, sir. No insignia. Disrespectful. I corrected her behavior in front of others to maintain discipline." Patterson leaned back, eyes narrowing. "You didn't verify her identity?" "There was no need. She had no rank." The colonel exhaled slowly. "You just admitted to striking a visiting officer under Pentagon clearance." Valdez blinked. "That's impossible." "It's confirmed." Patterson handed him a printout. "Arrival code PENT-4A, authorized by Joint Chiefs Security Office." The captain's face drained of color. Meanwhile, Rodriguez stood silently by the window, watching MPs gather near the runway. The hum of engines grew louder. Helicopters inbound, black-painted, no markings. He'd seen those kinds of birds only once before,
during a classified inspection a decade earlier. Williams entered breathless. "Sir, 3 helicopters inbound, ETA 4 minutes, Pentagon markings. They requested landing clearance and immediate access to the command wing." Patterson's heart sank. "Get the base locked down. No one leaves, no one transmits." Rodriguez turned from the window. "Sir, what do I tell my men?" The colonel's voice dropped to a whisper. "Tell them to stay silent and stay ready. What's coming isn't a briefing, it's a reckoning." Outside, the wind picked up, whipping desert dust across the tarmac. The first helicopter appeared as a dark speck against the horizon, growing larger with each second. In the command building, phones buzzed, boots pounded, orders flew. Valdez stood by the wall, his pride fighting to keep up with fear.
He didn't know it yet, but the people stepping off those helicopters would decide the rest of his life, and possibly end more careers than his own. The rotor thunder built to a roar that shook the glass in the colonel's windows. 3 Blackhawks touched down in a perfect staggered line. Doors opened. Men in dress uniforms stepped out, medals glinting in the sun. Rodriguez counted the stars on their collars. 3, 4, 4. His throat tightened. "Sir, those are generals." Patterson didn't look away from the window. "I know." Outside, the base sirens blared once, signaling full lockdown. In that moment, Camp Meridian stopped being a military installation. It became a crime scene. The first helicopter touched down in a cloud of sand and turbine roar, the sound rolling through Camp Meridian like thunder over a battlefield. Soldiers stopped what they were doing and stared. 3 dark silhouettes stepped onto the tarmac, their uniforms crisp, their movements deliberate. No one needed introductions. Their stars did the talking. Colonel Patterson and his staff waited by the hangar doors, the desert wind snapping at their uniforms. When the lead general approached, Patterson snapped to attention and saluted. "Lieutenant General Harrison, Pentagon Investigations Division," the man said, returning the salute with mechanical precision. "We'll take command of this situation effective immediately." Behind him followed Major General Roberts and Brigadier General Martinez. The trio represented more brass than Camp Meridian had ever seen in one place. It was a scene no commander ever wanted on their base. "Colonel," Harrison continued, "all personnel are to be restricted to quarters. We'll require access to all security footage and witness lists. No one leaves, no one communicates off base." Patterson's throat felt dry. "Yes, sir. Captain Valdez is in my office under guard." "Good. Then we'll start with him." Inside the command building, the air was suffocatingly still. Valdez sat at attention, hands locked on his knees, sweat gathering at his collar. The 3 generals entered without ceremony, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Captain Michael Valdez," Harrison said, "we've reviewed preliminary footage of your incident in your mess hall. You will explain your actions." Valdez cleared his throat, trying to steady his voice. "Sir, the individual displayed improper military courtesy. I acted to correct insubordination and preserve order." "Did you verify the individual's identity before striking them?" "No, sir. She wore no insignia." Roberts leaned forward. "So you assumed?" "Yes, sir." Harrison opened a folder and slid a photograph across the table. "That individual," he said, "is Major General Elizabeth Chun, Deputy Director of Special Operations, United States Marine Corps, and the daughter of the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff." Valdez stared at the photo, color draining from his face. "Sir, she didn't identify herself. She didn't have to. You were supposed to verify. You struck a general officer, Captain.
on camera, during an official inspection. Every officer believes they understand consequence until they find themselves facing it. The silence stretched until Valdez's own breathing sounded too loud. Patterson watched, jaw tight, realizing this wasn't just Valdez's ruin, it was his. He had known about the captain's temper. He'd chosen to manage it quietly instead of formally. And now the bill for every overlooked outburst had arrived. "Colonel Patterson," General Roberts said, turning his gaze, "you were aware of prior misconduct, were you not?" "Yes, sir," Patterson admitted. He'd received counseling. "Counseling," Harrison repeated. "3 written complaints, 2 verbal altercations, 1 documented use of excessive force, and you chose counseling." Patterson swallowed hard. "Yes, sir." Martinez closed her tablet. "Counseling ended today, Colonel, for both of you." Outside, the desert wind carried the dull thump of rotor blades as more aircraft approached, transport birds carrying investigators, legal teams, and military police. Within minutes, Camp Meridian was sealed under federal oversight. The gate checkpoints glowed red under sunset, and armed guards took posts like sentinels, awaiting judgment. Inside, Valdez sat motionless, realization settling like lead. "Sir, what happens now?" Harrison's answer was simple. "Now, Captain, you face the full weight of military and federal law." He turned to the MPs. "Take him to holding. He's under arrest for assaulting a superior officer." Valdez stood, trembling, the arrogance finally stripped from his voice. "Sir, I didn't know." "Captain, ignorance is not a defense. It's a confession." 2 MPs led Valdez out. Patterson watched him go, the clash of boots fading down the corridor like a slow drumbeat. Roberts closed the folder. "Colonel Patterson, your base is now under direct Pentagon command. You'll cooperate fully, or you'll join him in custody. Do I make myself clear?" "Yes, sir." As the generals left the room, Patterson turned toward the window. The airfield was a storm of movement, MPs roping off the mess hall, evidence teams hauling cameras, soldiers herded into lines for questioning. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the sand. He realized what Camp Meridian had become. Not a base, not a command, a lesson. And somewhere inside that storm of flashing lights and frightened faces, Major General Elizabeth Chun was watching, calm, silent, and about to speak for the first time since the slap. By dawn, Camp Meridian no longer felt like a Marine base. It felt like a courthouse. Military police lined every hallway. Yellow tape stretched across the mess hall entrance, and entire platoons were confined to quarters. The sound of rotors had faded through the night, replaced by the clatter of clipboards and the low murmur of investigators working under fluorescent lights. Colonel Patterson hadn't slept. He stood outside the temporary command center, watching the horizon turn from black to amber. He'd survived combat zones, but this quiet bureaucracy of consequence, felt worse. Inside, Lieutenant General Harrison convened the inquiry team. The table was a battlefield of documents, photos, and transcripts.
At the center sat a single still frame. Captain Valdez's hand mid-swing, frozen in time. The woman's head turned slightly from impact. "Gentlemen," Harrison said, "this is the moment that will define this base for the next decade." No one spoke. A knock broke the silence. The door opened, and Major General Elizabeth Chun entered. She wore a dark uniform, freshly pressed, with silver stars that caught the light like drawn steel. The mark on her cheek had faded, but the memory hadn't. She walked with the composure of someone used to command, not sympathy. "General Chun," Harrison said, rising, "thank you for coming. We need your statement for the record." "Of course," she said. Her voice was calm, deliberate, professional. She took her seat at the head of the table. "When I entered Camp Meridian, I was conducting an unannounced inspection of command climate and personnel conduct. The purpose was to observe authentic behavior, not staged courtesy. Identifying myself would have altered the results." Patterson felt his chest tighten. An inspection. He realized in that instant how doomed they all were. Chun continued, her eyes steady. "The incident in the mess hall was not about one captain. It was a product of an environment that normalized intimidation. Captain Valdez simply acted on a pattern that had been allowed to thrive. One man's arrogance exposed an entire system's failure." Harrison nodded slowly. "And your personal account of the assault?" Chun didn't hesitate. "He struck me across the face without provocation. I did not retaliate because I wanted to see what his command would do next. That's when I knew this wasn't about me. It was about the culture that created him." Her statement landed heavier than any order. Even the investigators' pens paused. General Roberts spoke next. "We've reviewed prior complaints. 3 written reports about Captain Valdez's aggression were ignored or downgraded to counseling. Colonel Patterson, you were responsible for oversight." "Yes, sir," Patterson said quietly. "I believed he could be corrected." Chun turned to him. Her tone wasn't angry. It was precise. "Correction without accountability isn't leadership, Colonel. It's permission." The words hit harder than Valdez's slap. Meanwhile, federal prosecutors arrived from Washington, Assistant U.S. Attorney Sarah Henderson leading the civil side of the inquiry. Her presence confirmed what everyone feared. This was no longer just military discipline. It was federal. "General Chun," Henderson said, "for the record, do you wish to press civil charges?" Chun paused, folding her hands. "This isn't about personal justice. It's about structural integrity. But if federal charges are necessary to restore that, then yes." The room was silent, except for the scribble of pens. Valdez was brought in under guard for formal testimony. His face was pale, uniform stripped of insignia, eyes hollow. He sat across from Chun, but couldn't meet her gaze. Harrison opened the record log. "Captain, you are being questioned under Article 31. Do you understand your rights?" "Yes, sir." "Explain your actions."
Valdez's voice shook. "Sir, I believed she was an enlisted soldier being disrespectful. I acted to maintain discipline. I didn't know who she was." Chun's reply was cold logic. "You didn't need to know who I was, Captain. You needed to know who you were and what the uniform requires of you." The silence that followed was suffocating. Harrison closed the file. "That's all we need." 2 MPs escorted Valdez out as the investigation shifted focus from him to the entire command chain. Henderson addressed the generals. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have grounds for federal prosecution, assault on a federal officer in performance of official duties, negligent supervision, institutional failure. We will move forward within 48 hours." Outside, the wind carried a faint hum, the sound of another convoy arriving. Pentagon staff, lawyers, press liaisons. The world was starting to circle. Inside the command center, General Chun stood, her chair scraping softly against the tile. She looked around the room, her voice even, almost gentle. "Gentlemen, this is not the end of a career. It's the beginning of a correction." Then she turned and left, the door closing behind her with the quiet finality of a gavel. That evening, as Camp Meridian's lights flickered on under the desert sky, The first headlines began to appear. By morning, the nation would know what had happened, and the Pentagon would no longer control the story. 6 months later, a quiet tension hung over the federal courtroom in Washington. Rows of uniforms filled the benches, Marines, officers, reporters, all waiting for the sentence that had already rewritten military law. Captain Michael Valdez stood at the defense table, wrists rigid at his sides. The courtroom felt smaller than a cockpit, the air heavier than any deployment he'd ever known. The judge's voice echoed through the chamber. Captain Michael Valdez, you have been found guilty on all charges: assault on a federal officer, deprivation of rights under color of authority, and conduct unbecoming of an officer. The court sentences you to 8 years in federal custody. He didn't look up. The words landed like artillery, one after another, until silence replaced pride. Major General Elizabeth Chun sat quietly in the gallery, her uniform immaculate, her expression unreadable. She hadn't attended to watch vengeance. She was there for accountability. When Valdez was led away, she didn't follow him with her eyes. She looked instead at the rows of young officers behind him, the ones who would inherit a military changed by his mistake. Outside the courthouse, reporters called it the slap that shook the Pentagon. But inside the service, it became something else, a case study in power, respect, and the cost of arrogance. Colonel Patterson received his own judgment soon after. 2 years for negligent supervision, career terminated, benefits revoked. He accepted it in silence because deep down he knew Major General Chun had been right. Leadership without accountability was just permission for failure. Sometimes one act of disgrace becomes the blueprint for reform.
Months later, Camp Meridian stood under new command. Cleaner, quieter, its walls lined with new posters about integrity and command conduct. A small bronze plaque near the renovated mess hall bore 12 words. Discipline is strength only when tempered by respect. At dawn, General Chun walked the flight line alone. The desert was still. The base, reborn under federal oversight, now served as a model for the entire Corps. She paused beneath the rising sun, the light catching the faint scar on her cheek, almost invisible now. And with that calm, measured composure that had undone an empire of arrogance, she whispered to no one in particular. Lesson complete.